Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Clinical Walls. I am excited to introduce my guests, Dr. Shah and Mr. and Mrs. Denise and Bernard Coley, who are here with me today to talk about Parkinson's disease. The work that they are doing to raise awareness about this disease is beyond the traditional measures that you see as far as letting people know about the disease, but also sharing how this disease can affect anyone. And so when we talk about Beyond Clinical Walls, you know it's about bringing forward new information as well as information that is about health equity. And when I think about Parkinson's disease, there is so much work to be done in respect to sharing what this disease does, as well as how it can affect anyone. So I'm excited to have my guest here with me. It is Parkinson's Month. And so I'll let Dr. Shah go ahead and introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Dr. BCW, and thank you for having us. We're so thrilled to be here to share our work. My name is Shah. I'm a neurologist and movement disorder specialist. I practice out of Columbia University in New York City, and I'm the medical director of the Parkinson Center of Excellence at our facility. And my work really is most centered around how we can address healthcare disparities, increase access to care for Parkinson's disease, and ensure that people receive the highest quality of care. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share our work with you. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
I'm so excited to have you here. Mr. and Mrs. Coley, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Denise Coley, and I am a person with Parkinson's. I was diagnosed in 2018, and I am a Parkinson's advocate, and I try to bring education, resources, awareness, and also research about Parkinson's to underengaged communities. And I want to thank you so very much for having me on this particular panel. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing us to address this very important topic. My name is Robert Bernard Coley. I am the care partner, and as I like to say, however, I have Parkinson's too, not because I have the disease, but one of the points we want to share with you this morning is that when the patient is diagnosed with Parkinson's, the entire family and those around her get Parkinson's disease. So I like to introduce myself also as the person with Parkinson's because there's no way you can avoid being impacted when a family member has Parkinson's disease. So I represent the voice of the care partners in the situations, or caregivers if they're supporters from the extended family, and that'll be part of the message that we share with you this morning. I too am a certified research advocate. I like to say my focus though is broader than that, in that we look into the health disparities that impact. One thing you'll hear us amplify later is that in the communities of color, Parkinson's is diagnosed much later than the norm. And so we're here to address and inform you about some of the health disparities and what we're doing to overcome them. So again, thank you for the opportunity this morning, and I look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. As you were speaking, there were a couple of things that really came to mind, and this happened immediately when I first got to meet you guys as well. You know, when we talk about Parkinson's disease, and we know it's a progressive disorder that, again, can affect anyone, and often there's so many different symptoms that go under the radar or not detected. And when you think about that, you look at what symptoms are you supposed to be looking for, and there's not a lot of information out there, but there's also not a lot of information with, you just mentioned, Mr. Coley, that it does affect people of color, and being able to highlight that not only just for patients, but also for providers. So today we are going to look at all of those intersectionalities and how they impact the disease, and also share awareness and solutions in hopes that anyone listening out there can have some takeaways, not only for themselves, but for their families, and hopefully join your efforts in raising awareness about this disease. So first, I'm just going to kick it off to Dr. Shah. How would you describe Parkinson's disease for the listeners out there?
Sure. So Parkinson's disease is a disease of the brain. Unfortunately, it's a progressive condition, meaning it does change or worsen over time. And it's a condition with the hallmark of 4 motor symptoms, meaning symptoms that affect one's movements, that being tremor, or a shaking of the limbs, stiffness of the muscles, which can manifest as kind of when you're walking, you may not swing your arms, or the body feels stiff and less fluid. Slowness of movement. I often hear that it takes twice as long to get ready and out the door. And finally, imbalance. And to make a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, you really only need 2 of these 4 clinical symptoms to meet criteria for a clinical diagnosis. Meaning that when someone's diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, most often that diagnosis is made by a clinical history and examination. But as you pointed out, there's many invisible symptoms. In the neurological world, we refer to these as non-motor symptoms, and they really can impact every organ system in the body. So some examples may be a change in sleep, a change in energy level or fatigue, constipation, urinary symptoms, sexual dysfunction. So it's really important to be aware of the various ways that Parkinson's can manifest or show up in one's life, and allow one to get early diagnosis, because that's really what we want. We don't want people out there struggling or suffering with these symptoms without treatment for decades, which is the story we often hear.
Absolutely. We often hear that people felt like, did I need to seek out mental health or get more physicals, more testing, because I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So thank you for sharing that. I hope everyone listening can think about those things that she just shared and keep those in the back of your mind. Keep those in your pocket as far as symptoms to be associated with Parkinson's disease. Now, when we talk about that, I always love to highlight personal stories. And I think that really helps give life to diseases. And so, Mrs. Coley, if you could share with the viewers your journey, I would love for them to hear what your journey, as well as Mr. Coley's journey, because I love how he is part of this process of what happened. So if you could share that with listeners, that would be wonderful.
Wonderful. I'll share the story, but I want to make one quick comment for everybody to keep in mind. Parkinson's disease is an equal opportunity club that you're inducted into. It's all cultures, all races, all ages, and throughout the whole world. 10 million plus in the world, 1 million plus in the US. Also, by the time you get your diagnosis, you've had Parkinson's for 10 to 15 prior years. So that's a little headline before I get started on my story. My story begins in Thanksgiving dinner, November 2017. We were eating dinner and my children said, "Mom, you're shaking." I said, "No, I'm not shaking." And I looked down, I guess I was shaking. And Bernard says, "Yes, you're shaking." We made an appointment with our doctor and he said that I needed to go and see a neurologist. I was perfectly fine going to see the neurologist because I figured it was essential tremors. I've heard a lot about that. So we went to the office, he did a few tests, and he promptly says, "You have Parkinson's." The wall went down. I heard nothing else after that until the very end of the appointment because I'm in shock. Parkinson's? He just gave me a death sentence. What? My world is flashing before my eyes. And I'm thinking, all the things I love and advocate for and passionate about will no longer be possible. So from there, we went home. We decided that I would get the DAT scan. And the DAT scan showed that, yes, there was some loss. So I had to really sit down and think about it. So I gave myself a short pity party, about 3 months. Bernard will say otherwise. I only told 4 people.
Shaking.
I only told 4 people because if my life was flashing before my eyes and everything that I knew that I loved and I wanted to do and continue to do was at a sort of standstill, I'm in sort of a state of shock and had to really sit down and think about what was going to be done. From that night on, I have done Parkinson's research daily, wherever I can find updates on what's going on. And then I had a talk with Bernard, and I said, "Bernard, maybe we should look at these gaps and work together on this." And he looks at me like, "I have my whole plate of work. I have so much work to do. Putting this on is just going to be an enormous piece." But we decided that perhaps there are some significant gaps that we were interested in looking at. Under engagement, getting messaging out, making people aware, making sure people don't suffer and that they have hope and quality of life. So we decided that we would repurpose some of our skills and work together to be Parkinson advocates. So I contacted the Parkinson Foundation, and the foundation had a program called Parkinson Advocates in Research. So Bernard and I both were accepted. We went through the program so we could be certified to work with researchers. The salient part of all this is at the very final day, they ask you, well, you should become a Parkinson's advocate. What is your emphasis? And so at that point, I had made up my mind that for me is bringing the awareness, which is not old age symptoms, that it slowly affects you, but you need to be aware of the symptoms. Second of all, you need to make sure that you're given the resources to help yourself and know who to contact. And thirdly, to make sure once you have been diagnosed, you've gotten the research and you've gone to see the neurologist and MDS, that you participate in research, because everyone who has Parkinson's should participate in research. And PD generation is available to those who have Parkinson's, and there's no charge, and you get counseling. And why is that important? Because if all of us do not participate, especially those who are women and people in underengaged communities, we won't have a pool big enough to find out if there are other genes out there that might help in terms of therapy and treatments. So that's a little short story, and with the ending. At that point, that was 2 years ago, I met Dr. Shah, and we became part of the PD Movers and the book PD Movers, We Keep Moving.
Thank you for sharing that, and now go ahead, Mr. Coley.
So now I'll put us back on the road.
Yes.
As is my role on the Care Partner. So let me go back and touch a couple of places along the journey. So we mentioned that Dr. Shaw mentioned the motor symptoms, which are generally used to diagnose Parkinson's disease. The challenge, though, from the perspective of the family, the care partner, and those others that are impacted, is that there are many other symptoms, and they show up well before some of the motor symptoms. So, for example, I began doing business travel with Denise some 7 or 8 years before she was diagnosed, because she was falling. She was having trouble lifting things. She was slowing down. We began to have to travel at least a day in advance of conferences or any work that she was doing, because at the time we thought she was having air sickness and needed a day or so to recover. And I'm mentioning these kinds of symptoms. There were others. Her handwriting was small, so my role as care partner didn't begin with her diagnosis. In fact, I like to say my journey as a care partner happened on July 4th, 1976, the bicentennial, because I said, I do. And the journey began at that point. And what I tell people, though, is what I didn't know as a care partner was the informed consent form was really lacking, and I didn't know what I was signing up for when I said I do. But here we are. One point I'll highlight for those of you who find yourself in similar positions is your role as a care partner. You should think about that as part of the treatment plan, because Parkinson's patients need a lot of support, and you are, the first line of defense in this degenerative disease. So right there in the exam room, when Denise got the diagnosis that she has Parkinson's disease, I like to tell people that what happened next was a scene out of Peanuts. As she was looking at the doctor, and what she heard was wah 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 wah. For the next 30 minutes, she heard nothing. She pronounced at the end of that the doctor had given her a death sentence. I said, that's not what he said. But I get it, because it was like, for people in our community who aren't familiar with degenerative brain diseases like Parkinson's disease, it translates into a death sentence. All your worst fears come right before your eyes, and you don't have the experience to process it, which is why we set off partly on a journey of raising awareness, because there is not a need to suffer as much if you know more about this and how it impacts and the things you can do. So I mentioned that I had started traveling on Denise's business trip. We started doing more together on trips. She would go with me, I'd go with her. Many years before we got the official diagnosis, because she in fact had Parkinson's then. Some of the other things were fatigue, challenges when she was giving speeches, the need to review things. I mean, all those things so that she could continue. Let me add two insightful points right here. So one of it is the lack of information in our community, but also the lack of information outside of our community about how we're impacted. So for example, Denise mentioned she only told 4 people. And that was one of our first bones of contention, because I said, no, we have to tell a lot of people. But there's good reasons. For example, we talked to a lot of Parkinson's patients who will not tell anybody because they want to keep working. And when we talk about lack of information in communities of color and outside of these communities about what's going on, there are real fears that aren't just, oh, Henrietta lacks or the Tuskegee experiment. They're real world things like, I can't afford to lose my job. I've got to help. Or if you are a female with Parkinson's disease, I got to take care of my family. I don't want people to know because I don't want to not be in a position to carry out my responsibilities in life. So there are things we impart now as we go out and inform other communities who have these resources about why they're not reaching underengaged communities, what are the challenges. For example, you can't just hold an educational seminar and expect people to show up, because if they don't want anybody around them to know because they fear they might lose their job or they might be ostracized because of the stigma attached to any disease in many of these communities, they're not coming. I mean, they're just not coming. So that's point number one. We need to talk about this stuff. We need to raise awareness, but it's bi-directional awareness. We both need to inform the community and we need to inform those who are trying to serve the community, who have great intentions, but they don't understand what the challenges are. So moving along our journey, then, I like to say that the longest travel we had was the journey across Siberia, okay? It was a trek. That was from the doctor's office to the car in the parking lot, because a lot happened on that trek. Number one, I had to convince my wife she wasn't gonna die before we got to the car. Number two, the argument started about telling people, because I said, look, people see something's going on. I'd rather fill in the gaps than to have people guess, because they don't always guess the nicest things. And if we're gonna do this thing, we're gonna have to deal with it. And at that time, I knew a smidgen of what I now know about Parkinson's disease, but I knew we were about to get engaged in the fight of our lives for the remaining time. And it was going to have a significant impact, because in fact, we had already been having the impacts noticeably for, at that point, like I said, at least 7 years. And then when we figured it out, it was more like 10 years before that many of the symptoms we now know showed up.
And Mr. Coley, I want to stop you there just because there's so many important pieces that you have shared, and I want to bring them to light for everyone listening. You know, when I think about the fact that you said, even before the diagnosis, she was slowing down, she was falling, there were all of these things that were happening. And I think it's important that we emphasize that, because I'm sure there's someone listening right now that might have the symptoms that you are mentioning, or know a family member that, you know, has seen something like this, because the symptoms are quite general, but they could be Parkinson's. And I think that is so important to really have that connection where anyone listening right now, if there's something from a loved one, a friend, a family, and you've noticed that they're not at their baseline, that there are things that they used to do that they can't do right now, the handwriting has changed, any of those kinds of things, I want you to consider this disease. And so I stop you there because I think it is so important what you mentioned for viewers to kind of take note. The other piece that I want to highlight was the fact that you talked about, people in our community. It's often a barrier just for us to even feel like we can trust the healthcare system. And then there's also, I think, our own personal circle, whether you want to say it's race, ethnicity, or culture, where there is this fear of sharing what is happening to us. And I think there's a lot of things that are associated, such as, oh, that family's not as strong, or this family's having issues. And there's this thought that we have to hide things in our community. And I would assume you know where I'm coming, whether it's mental health, physical health, and so forth. By you mentioning that, I think it's important for people to think about their health is, of course, your most prized possession. And by sharing what's going on, not only with your healthcare provider, but with your community, that is vital in being able to get the care that you need or get there sooner. Because as you mentioned earlier, this disease or these symptoms were happening, or Mrs. Coley mentioned, 10 to 15 years beforehand. So I think all of those parts are just really important that we highlight. And when we think of the health inequities and how this disease is often not talked about in people of color, can you share some of the things that you were able to find out during your research when you were diagnosed?
One of the things that I found out is there weren't many people of color who were individuals that you could look up to with Parkinson's. You had Linda Ronstadt, you had Muhammad Ali, and Reverend Jesse Jackson and Brian Grant were some of the ones that we had. So I had to really dig down and do some research. And there are a couple things that tie into what Bernard said that I can also emphasize with that. I had the disease 10 to 15 years before diagnosis. The problem we had was from 2000 to 2005, I did marathons for leukemia and lymphoma, and I did 3-day breast cancer walks. So I was in optimum physical shape, and I was putting in lots of mileage. That can deter a diagnosis. And because it's a slow degenerative disease, it slowly came on. I slowly was starting to fall. I slowly was starting to have fatigue. I slowly was being tired, and I slowly couldn't do my 10-hour days and things of that sort. So those things were very slow in coming. And then when I was diagnosed, it was the whole body. It affected the family, as Bernard said, but it also affected the animals. The biggest dog will walk me up the stairs and walk me down the stairs, which they never had to do before. And developing the right care team. Bernard and I spent a lot of time about care teams. If you find someone who has the symptoms of fatigue, micrographia, insomnia, thermal dysregulation, which I have quite frequently, as well as the fatigue, if you have 2 or 4 of those symptoms, you should probably go in and have a checkup to see what's going on. And then each one of us is different. Each one of us experiences symptoms, motor and non-motor, but not all the same. And if you're an advocate, which I decided to do, I started taking all my research and putting it out on social media.
If we're not out there, this is an important point I want to drive home. If we're not out there, the doctors don't think people in the communities of color have Parkinson's disease. So part of what we discovered was the need to inform the medical community, many of whom received a thumbnail's worth of education about Parkinson's disease during their training. They've heard of it. They know it's a degenerative brain disease, but they have not experienced, to their knowledge, a patient of color who has Parkinson's disease. So they're reticent to diagnose. It doesn't even come in their thought pattern to diagnose it. Also, people then in your surrounding community, because they don't know anybody who has Parkinson's disease, don't think that's your problem. That you have too much to drink, or what's going on? Why are you falling? Why are you bumping into things? Why are you stammering when you talk a little? Why is your voice so soft? I can barely hear you, which is one of the symptoms. So we have to get out there and raise awareness so that people, even if they go to the medical facilities, get properly diagnosed. So that was one of the things that we learned. The second thing is developing the trust. So How do you get there? Well, first, we have to communicate back to our communities things that have changed in the way of protocols around clinical research, reasons why they can begin to trust the research environment more than they could in the past. So it behooves us to communicate that back to the community, that there are more safeguards in their work. And then probably we like to put it under the big heading of representation matters. The book itself, who's in the book, the storytelling about us, by us, that representation is important, but it's also important that we show them that there are neurologists and MDS who are from the community of color, that there are people that look like them. We often describe the moment we were first on the screen with PD movers. Literally, we were on the screen, and for the first time in our lives, we saw more Black people with PD than we knew existed. It was an aha moment for us, but it was also across the screen, tears. We were all choked up looking at each other because we were all experiencing in that moment the same thing. None of us had ever seen that many Black people on the screen at the same time with Parkinson's disease. And here we are. We're just like, wow, we are not alone. So one of these other things that I want to lift up, Doctor, is that you're not alone, and that's important. If I'm out there on the island by myself, I have a completely different feeling from the feeling that I get if I just need to go out and find more like me. So one of the other things that's come out of our research, for example, is we're exploring the need for special culturally sensitive support groups. Because if you take all the baggage that we bring, good and bad, culturally, into living a better life with Parkinson's, you need to be involved in a support group. But what if you can't find one where you feel comfortable? You don't feel like you can open up and trust the people in there. And yes, there's a historical context to all that, but now that we recognize that, one of the things we've set out to do is to inform organizations who support the support group leaders of how they can reach the underengaged communities, and inform others of the need for us to produce culturally sensitive support groups to be able to support our community as the initial bridge. We have begun to focus from our research on solutions to the various problems in the Parkinson's community, which are impacted by these health disparities and the challenges with trust. And I'll leave it there.
No, that was perfect, Mr. Coley. I appreciate that. And this is where I'm going to want Dr. Shah's opinion, and I'm going to share a little bit of mine as well. The information we receive as physicians going through medical school and really knowing a lot about the disease, I endorse that fully that he mentioned. There's just not a lot of emphasis put on the disease. And when it came to what would a Parkinson's disease look like, it definitely wasn't someone that looked like me. And so there is more work that we need to do in respect to really what Parkinson's can look like, which should be the answer. Anybody can get this. Especially, we need to put more time into medical students and residents to look at people of color and put that part of their differential diagnosis. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that in medical school and often in training, we see the image that James Parkinson sketched back in the 1800s of an older white gentleman with tremor. And we now know that not only is that image inaccurate, but it misses a lot of the complexity of Parkinson's disease. So there are different phenotypes, or meaning different ways that the disease presents. Not everyone with Parkinson's disease has tremor. So if you're only looking for the tremor, you're going to miss a lot of folks out there that have Parkinson's disease without that specific symptom. And just to underscore that, as Denise pointed out, this is a disease that affects each person in a different way. So people need to be aware that there's a variety of motor and non-motor or invisible symptoms that can be the heralding feature of this disorder. So including loss of sense of smell, we've heard about fatigue, constipation, pain, Anxiety or depression can precede Parkinson's disease. Apathy, a lack of kind of interest, sleep disturbances, and so on. So it's a very complex disorder, but I guess, we're trying to raise awareness of the fact that it can affect all genders, all ethnicities and races, the young and the old. And so it's not just a disorder of an older adult, but it can affect all ages. And it's critical for people with Parkinson's and their families to be educated and empowered so that they can access these critical resources. Because, just to summarize or restate what has been echoed here, African American, Black and Brown individuals unfortunately face prolonged delays to diagnosis because of many of this lack of information. They're less likely to be started on medication at diagnosis. They're 4 times less likely to be referred to rehabilitation services like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. They're 8 times less likely to be referred for advanced treatment like deep brain stimulation. So this all leads to higher rates of disability and compounds the impacts of underrepresentation in research. So we really need to bring this to everyone's minds, because one of the disturbing facts is we don't know how many African American, Black and Brown people are living with Parkinson's disease today in the United States. And that's really sad and disturbing, and speaks to the fact that we're not reaching, these communities. And that's part of what brought us to this type of work. I saw that lack of representation in the clinic waiting rooms, and that's what led me to pursue a community-based participatory research program training. And that's where I met Miss Anita Parker, who's been my partner along with Dr. Lori Quinn. Ms. Parker is the outreach director at St. Luke AME Church, and she told me from the beginning, Hero, we have to talk about it. People aren't talking about it. And if you go into the community, start talking about Parkinson's disease, they're not going to come. And so over time, we did a series of events and educational events, and we showed up and we built that trust that you're talking about so that we could inform, educate, and empower. And the product was the PD Movers book, which has just been, I think, so amazing because it combines first-person narratives that use a storytelling approach, which is engaging, easy to understand, whether you have limited health literacy or experience with the medical enterprise or you're a professional. I've been told that, people learn from this book because it's the stories of the individuals and care partners. We're putting them front and center and using, as you said, illustrations that underline the importance of representation. When people see themselves in these stories, it's opening doors, it's opening minds and hearts to the lived experience. So we're just so proud of this work, and I think it's a model of what we can do if we put the patient and care partner at the center, and how impactful a resource that can be developed. I think we as doctors, we often think, well, I know all the answers, or I know how to solve your problems. But I think we are not aware of the many assumptions that we make about the preferences and priorities of patients and their families. So I think it behooves us, and I've learned so much through this process of how important it is to have patients and care partners involved every step of the way, from conceptualization to implementation. And so that's really been so important to me to share and remind people of how important that is.
Absolutely. And, this is the perfect time to really highlight the book and how you can order it. When you see this cover, I just want to share, when Dr. Shah sent it to me and I opened it and I got to see the illustration and just the level of detail and representation put just from the cover of this page, it actually, it was overwhelming because of happiness to see something be represented as it should be. It's called the PD Movers. We keep moving, living and thriving with Parkinson's disease in our Black and African American communities. I am so excited for people to check out this book. And what I'm planning on doing is bringing my guests back for a part 2 and part 3 series where we can really highlight even more about this disease, highlight what does it mean to be a care partner or a caregiver, as well as how do we make strides in making this disease more at the forefront? What can we do to increase engagement? So for me, I'm all in as a partner, not just as a one-time, let's amplify this. Let's continue the conversation. Let's continue the work in hopes that more people know about this disease and we increase representation. I want to start with Mr. and Mrs. Coley and see if there's any other parting words. I know when I first met Mr. Coley, he had a very powerful quote or statement that he shared with me, and I'm excited for the viewers to hear. So I'll kick it off with you two. Any parting words?
Around the area of research, I like to tell people that I'm also a scientist. I have a background in science and math. And I tell people that what you may not realize is that we may be one diverse patient away from finding a cure or producing a powerful and better treatment. And so it is extremely important that we bring diversity into the research space, the education space, because we have been depriving ourselves simply because of a lack of diversity and inclusion in clinical research work.
Perfect. And Ms. Coley?
I truly believe that each patient and care partner in their ecosystem can be empowered to take control of their journey with their MDS and neurologists. My last parting words is something that Maya Angelou said. Maya Angelou said, "Hope and fear cannot exist together." So I always think about that and I say, well, I choose hope because we can empower people to have resources to take control of their journey.
I love that. And Dr. Shah, I would love for you to share how people can get to know about the book, information, of course, the website that Mr. and Mrs. Coley, the organization that they have, all of that information. Can you share with the listeners, please?
Absolutely. So you can connect with us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. You can also download the book at the Columbia website. If you were to Google Columbia PD Movers, you'll find it. You can also get a hard copy of the book for free through APDA, the American Parkinson's Disease Association, who's partnered with us to support its dissemination and distribution. But I just want to make sure everyone knows this book is free. Our goal is to get this book into as many hands as we can. Share it with your friends, your family, your community, whether it's in a YMCA, a senior center, your church. If you'd like a bulk order, we're happy to accommodate you because we want people to get this book and see the beautiful stories of individuals like the Coleys and more, so that you can really know that Parkinson's disease, there are ways to live and thrive, and that it does affect all people, so we all need to be educated and empowered.
Love it.
One final statement too on that. We want you to know something that we discovered almost by accident. We started hearing almost immediately from people that they were reading the book cover to cover in one setting. And that really set us off. It's like, right, they're reading about PD, a medical book, and they're reading it cover to cover. And the punchline is 63 pages. But then the next thing that got us excited behind that was, as my wife likes to say, it's multi-generation. We have people talking to their children. We have families now talking to each other where they weren't sharing the diagnosis before. So we're excited, and for those of you who will check out the book, because it has opened the dialogue, something that all of us have been trying to do. People are communicating using the book as a tool.
Love that. Yes, it is a form of health information, and it needs to get out there even more. So thank you all for joining me today. It has been a wealth of information, and I'm really excited for listeners to push the needle, move that needle, and share this information. Let's keep the conversation going. This is Dr. BCW. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen. This is Dr. BCW with Beyond Clinical Walls. Thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next upload. And if you found this information helpful, please hit the thumbs up. It really helps the channel. As always, thanks for watching and thank you for your support.